You're listening to the Inside the Mix podcast with your host, Mark Matthews.
Hello, folks, and welcome back to the Inside the Mix podcast. If you are a returning listener, a big welcome back as always. And if you are new to the podcast, make sure you hit that follow button on your podcast player of choice. And also, if you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and also the notification bell so you know when we go live and a new episode drops. So it is Boxing Day, December the 26th, and I hope that you've had your fill of Christmas food and drink. And what better way to relax and unwind than joining me and diving into the archives of the Inside the Mix podcast again for the final time, might I add. And this time we are diving into the most downloaded, the most popular episode of 2023, which is my chat with Brian Hazard, aka Color Theory. So if you're unfamiliar with Brian, he is also a mastering engineer, a professional mastering engineer, as well as the very talented artist Color Theory. And in this episode, we dive into music creation and production, exploring Brian's influences and favorite instruments. And he also shares his approach to songwriting and composition and shares some valuable tips on how to get started with writing a new song. We also chat about top tips for DIY mixing and mastering, including why you shouldn't bother using multi-band compression and whether dynamic EQ is a good idea. Then we explore the good, age-old question of whether too many plugins are detrimental to mixing and mastering, and Brian shares some great advice on how to avoid common mistakes. So that's enough for me, folks. Now sit back, relax, put your feet up, grab a glass of eggnog and some leftover food from Christmas Day, and listen to episode 79, 6 essential mixing and mastering tips with Color Theory. Now in this episode, I'm very excited to welcome my guest today, Brian Hazard, aka Color Theory. So Color Theory is a synth pop artist and professional mastering engineer with a passion for songwriting and producing, and has amassed more than 5 million streams across streaming platforms. Wow. And he's going to share with us a little about his background and several songwriting and music production pearls of wisdom. Hi, Brian, aka Color Theory. How are you? And thank you for joining me today.
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Just for our audience listening, I always ask this now because the podcast has a worldwide reach. Where are you joining us from today?
I am in Huntington Beach, California.
Oh, brilliant. This is totally a British thing to say now, but what's the weather like there?
Actually, it's not characteristically Southern California. It's overcast. It's in the... Now, don't make me do a Celsius thing. It's in the mid 50s Fahrenheit right now. So I mean, it's nice. It's, I'm running in a t-shirt and shorts, but I do that all year anyway. So
yeah. Oh, nice. It's moderately overcast here, and I think it's about 10 degrees. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit.
That makes two of us.
Yeah, exactly. But the fact it's overcast, like I said just then, the reason I asked is the podcast does. I speak to people all over the globe, and it's so cool that there's this platform available whereby you can have these conversations, and it's amazing. I'm always intrigued. I was chatting to somebody earlier in Singapore.
Wow.
So yeah, it's fantastic getting to meet people all over the globe. Brilliant stuff. So, Color Theory. Tell our audience a bit about your sort of musical influences growing up. Which artist, song, or album sort of left an indelible mark on you and sort of made you forge your career, your pathway in music?
Well, my first actual music purchase was the Eagles' Hotel California on cassette. I wouldn't say that was the one that really got me into music, but that's when I started having enough interest in music to branch off from my parents. I think that was right around the time where they switched over to country music. So the album that really connected with me the most was, it's not going to be a big surprise, was Depeche Mode. It was Some Great Reward. And my best friend and I, we would, he was always introducing me to music. We'd play the records. We'd sit there and listen to music, right? I mean, imagine that. Just sit there with the sleeve open and the lyrics, and pretty soon we're singing along, and then sooner or later it's like, okay, well, I'm going to do the higher harmonies when we're singing along. I mean, it's pretty silly. So I had Somebody, of course, was the song that I really fell in love with, and I remember he had a typewriter. I know I sound really old, but it was old for the time too. His mom was a professional I don't know the proper
Transcriber?
way to say it. Transcriber. Yeah, is that really it? So for medical records and stuff. So there's a typewriter, and I love those lyrics so much. I typed them up, and I took them home, and I dubbed it to cassette from his record, and I listened to it all the time. So that was really the branching off point for me.
Amazing. I love the fact you mentioned Eagles, Hotel California as well, because as soon as you said that, it sparked my sort of nostalgia for my music influence. And when I started playing guitar, the reason I sort of started playing was because I wanted to do the guitar harmonies from Hotel California at the end. I still haven't got around to actually doing it, to be fair. I then went and pivoted in various other directions. And then obviously you got the Depeche Mode influence there as well. And I think it's fair to say you can sort of hear that in your music. And we'll come on to that in a bit. But no, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. So as actually a musician, do you have a particular instrument that you are sort of proficient with, or do you have multiple instruments?
Yeah. Well, I'm very, very proficient at the piano, more proficient than I need to be, because I actually got a degree in piano performance. So essentially I went to school to be a concert pianist, is what it comes down to, is what my day looked like. So, that's my main instrument. I played mallet percussion in the drumline and all the different instruments for different things. And I taught high school drumline for a few years. So, I'm decent at percussion and can manage the drum set. I got through Rock Band in expert mode, the whole thing.
Fantastic.
Can't play a lick of guitar. I think at one point I could play Message in a Bottle by the Police, which was actually pretty impressive, and I could kind of sing it, although by the end of the song my voice was tired. So that's about it for me. I don't really consider myself a singer. Of course, that's the most important thing I do.
Yeah.
But,
it's an interesting one being a singer, because I write my own music as well, and I always toy with the idea of thinking, you know what, can I sing? Should I give it a go? At what point? Because I'm always intrigued by this. At what point did you think, actually, you know what, I can sing a little. I'm gonna throw it down on a record and see what happens.
Oh no, I mean I was always doing it. Like I had in high school, I was in a band called the Untitled Chapter, which I named one of my albums after. It's just me and a friend and his brother, and I sang and traded off with him, and then I was in a band called European White Disco in college. That was kind of like Wham meets Duran Duran, if you can imagine that. Wow. And I sang backup, so I always sang, but I'm not lead singer material. You know what I mean? Like I'm not gonna go on a stage with just me and a mic and do the things. That's just not me.
Yeah, I get you. Lovely stuff. I think what we'll move on to next then is sort of the main item, which is surrounding sort of music production and a bit of songwriting with regards to your music. So I think it'd be good to start off with a song in particular. So If You Want Me To, being the title of the song, can you just break down for our audience sort of like the songwriting and composition process for this particular song? How does a song start for Color Theory?
Yeah, so the process between songs isn't too different. So, and I don't want to bore you with a huge diatribe on this, but basically I have a process, and then I have a process I'd like to do, but I don't do.
Okay.
So the process as it actually happens is, like most people, I hear about people having these unfinished ideas and people don't finish songs, and you see on YouTube like how to finish songs. That is not my problem. I do not have extra ideas lying around. Yeah. For me, I have to deliver a song every month to patrons on Patreon. And with studio work, you never know when that's coming in. And that's obviously priority. And so sometimes, it gets really close to the end of the month and I've got to deliver a song. So basically, I am writing and recording a song in about 5 days, the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I always start from a production snippet. And so that's, usually just like drums, bass, maybe some kind of lead arpeggio or synth line, or just enough there to establish a feel. Mm-hmm. And the reason I do that is, naturally I would write at the piano. And I did my first couple albums, I wrote them at the piano. And I think what I found is that I had like reviewers refer to it as an album of ballads. There's just something about writing at the piano that doesn't necessarily translate to, a synth pop kind of context. So I think starting with that idea and having a groove in mind makes it a lot easier. So I've got that groove. As far as the song itself, I like to start from a title, because if you've got a cool title, that's half the battle.
Yeah.
Generally from there, I end up producing the entire instrumental. So now I've got, every little bit, even the transitions and sweeps and all that kind of stuff. Just because by the time I record vocals and work through the vocals and all that, like I don't want to go back and read, and touch up the production and add the finishing touches. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the melodies now I'm going to poke out at the piano or, synth piano, figure that out, write some lyrics, record the vocals, mix it and master. And for me, the mastering is not a drawn out thing. It's really just compression, limiting, and dither, and anything else that needs to be addressed, I'm going to go back in the mix and fix it.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's the process.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So I find it's fantastic that you've got the Patreon side of things going, and you've given yourself this accountability there to writing these songs, and I love that idea. And then it's almost like you have got a deadline, haven't you, to write this song for your Patreon Patreons. And also the idea that you have no extra ideas lying around, which I think is interesting as well, because it sort of mirrors. I don't have a Patreon, and I'm not releasing music in that sort of format. But I personally as well, I don't have loads of ideas lying around. I sort of focus on one particular idea, or maybe two or three that are going to form a cohesive piece, rather than have multiple ideas. The fact that you don't have loads of ideas lying around, do you think that's why you find it so much easier to finish a song? So you're not getting distracted by sort of like shiny objects, this other idea that I've got over there. How do you stay focused on just one idea?
Well, the deadline is very persuasive, as we mentioned. So it's been 6 years now on Patreon. So that's what? 62 songs. Did I do that right? No, that can't be right. Yeah, why am I having trouble with this? No, 60 is 5 years, right? So 72 songs, 72 tracks. So it works really well. Before Patreon, it took me 6 years to do an album because I would just keep rehashing. You know what I mean? You finish the last song and then you go back to the first song and you're like, well, that's not up to the standard of the last song anymore. I need to touch that up. And then it's just an endless cycle. So yeah, I think I just sit down and do it because it's got to be done. Mm-hmm. And I'm probably not going to abandon an idea, because even if the song isn't great, it's still going to be up to a standard I establish. And if it's a patron exclusive, that's even kind of cooler. You know what I mean? Like, then that's something special that they get that nobody else gets to hear. Maybe a different side of me that doesn't, kind of mesh with the public, profile.
Yeah. That's great. I love that, and I think the fact that you're releasing so many songs. 60. What did we say? 72 songs.
72 in 6 years.
Over 6 years is amazing, and I like the idea that you plow on through and complete a song, and it kind of mirrors the conversation I had with Ed Sunglasses Kid before Christmas in 2022, where he said the same thing. It's kind of like you might hit a brick wall, or you might think, actually, this song isn't quite doing it for me, but just persevere and break through and write that song anyway, because you don't know what's going to happen on the other end, which I think is a great thing for our audience, because I know I do chat and I interact with a lot of the audience, and that idea of not finishing songs is one of their main pain points is finishing a song, and also thinking, actually, you know what, I'm going to start something else because I've got a better idea. But I mean, I've fallen foul of that. But in 2023, I've made a point now of thinking, right, I'm going to write a song. I've got 30 minutes a day. I'm going to dedicate to songwriting, and I'm going to break the back of the song, and I'm going to get through and do it. And I'm reaping the rewards from it. And the podcast does help. I speak to so many artists like yourself, and it's great for me and the audience because I can take all this information, absorb it, and pick the pieces I want, and create with this amazing workflow, which is fantastic. So with regards to your composition, we've been through the composition process. So with mixing as well. So you're doing all that in 5 days. How do you sort of the mixing process? How do you get it? For one of a better way of putting it, how do you get it done so quickly?
It's not really a process. So the best example of that would be, I don't know if you saw this. I released a cover of Depeche Mode's "Ghost Again" within 12 hours of them releasing it.
No, I haven't seen this.
Yeah, so I found out. I think I was emailing people who bought stuff on Bandcamp. I like to send a personal email every time somebody does that. And somebody replied and then just mentioned, hey, looking forward to the new Depeche Mode single tomorrow morning or tomorrow or something. I was like, what? Okay. I mean, I knew they had an album coming out, but I try to stay away from social media, so I didn't know that it was actually coming out at that day. So I went for my run, came back, looked for the song. It wasn't there. And I saw on YouTube it was going to come out like in 20 minutes. So I got a drink, hung out, heard the song. I was like, oh, I kind of like this. I think I could do something with this. And I just threw everything aside and there it is. So the mixing isn't really a separate process. I don't rough everything out with sounds and just hope to fix it later. I've got to hear how it's going to sound in context. So I'm always kind of mixing as I go.
Yeah, I can see how that would make sort of expedite the process and make it quicker. So with regards to mixing, have you got any sort of like top tips for if for producers out there, the audience listening, who are writing and mixing as they go? Have you got any sort of top tips, or maybe a top tip for producers, artists that are doing that?
Well, I've maybe a controversial one. So I've got just a load of advice that is me as a mastering engineer telling clients to do so that their mixes are prepared properly.
Perfect.
The worst thing that they can do is to mix through compression and limiting because they want to know how it's going to sound. I know this is controversial. A lot of people swear by it. What happens is they do that, and to me, if they're going to compress the whole mix, anything you do to the whole mix is kind of by definition mastering. In my opinion, right? Because it's done on the master. It's performed on the master. So if you're going to compress it before you give it to me, my hands are tied as far as I'm concerned. The attack and release characteristics of your compressor are permanently imprinted on the whole mix. I'm not going to be able to get the punch out of it that I want. So then I usually hear things like, oh, it's only like, 2 or 3 dB, which is huge. Like to give you a perspective, I use Unison mastering compressor is my main tool for mastering, and it's the most intimidating plugin ever. It's amazing the way that you can fine tune the detection circuit at different frequency bands to respond to the mix, but it's only a broadband compressor. It's not multiband. But anyway, one of the features is you can set a limit on compression. So I have it set to 2 dB. Like it will never compress more than 2 dB because I've set that as a limit. So when people say, oh, it's just a couple dB before they send it to me, it's like, well, okay, there's nothing left. So my advice is always don't mix through compression and limiting. It's a crutch. Get it right in the mix. So that would be my number one.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. So what about, so a bit, not necessarily devil's advocate here, but
Sure.
what about producers that are mixing into, I don't know, some form of like, I don't know, tape emulation or something like that? Would you
That's the worst.
Would you advise then, like leaving that mix bus empty?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So if you want, well, tape emulation, not so much. But I mean, if you want some sort of glue compression on the drum bus, I mean, go for it. Of course, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying don't use a compressor anywhere in your mix. I'm just saying,
Of course.
Yeah, just not on the master bus.
Yeah.
Tape emulation is, it's compression, yes, somewhat, depending on how you hit it. It's adding harmonics, so it's a saturator depending on how you hit it. I, again, would say if we want that color, it would be better for me to apply it after I do my other stuff.
Yeah.
There's a really cool, again, in Unison, there's a little kind of button called Higgy, I think is how it's pronounced. I think it's like a Scandinavian thing. I don't know. I think it means sweet or something. But anyway, it's just a little kind of transistor circuit that accomplishes a lot of the same thing that just sounds amazing. That, if I get something that's really cold and sterile, it doesn't happen much these days, but like I just mastered a 20-year-old album and converters were different back then. So it really helped warm that up. So I've got tools on my end, of course, to do that. And I would just say, what I do when somebody really insists on having that is I say, okay, can you send me the mix both ways, with the tape emulation and without? And so I know what you're going for. And then I will hopefully prove to them that it was better without. But,
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So going back to what you said earlier then about when you're mixing, so you're effectively, and how when you're mixing your own music and then you master it thereafter, you mentioned there about you go back and fix in the mix rather than fix in the master. And obviously that makes perfect sense. So just to touch on your mastering chain again of what you're using in your particular mastering, for our audience listening, and if they are doing their mastering at home, this sort of DIY mastering, have you got any advice? Maybe again, a top tip if they're mastering their own music. What would be your top tip there?
Well, okay. So if I ramble, you'll need to stop me. But I've got
go
a
ahead.
little bit of a preach it kind of thing. So I would stay away from AI mastering at all costs. I actually consulted on Lander's engine for a while. And you've seen like the latest Ozone has basically AI mastering built in. Mm-hmm. So you get a little better idea of how it works. And those processes, and this goes for plugins like Gullfoss or Soothe 2, any of these plugins that are in real time pushing your mix towards a certain spectral balance that they've predetermined is appropriate for your genre, right? So if you've got this, EDM preset, then they've decided like here's a tonal shape for the whole mix that we see across the number of EDM hits. Which I mean the methodology sounds like it makes sense, right? So
yeah,
we want it to sound like a hit, so let's just keep pushing your mix in that direction the whole time. Where it falls apart though is if you've got, say, the third verse, you drop the kick out for 8 bars because, you're trying to build up some tension and you want that to sound softer. Well, these plugins don't know that. So they're going to push, the low end up now to try to get you towards that shape that really doesn't apply anymore. Or if the hi-hat drops out, what now? Now we got to push all the highs, the sibilance is coming up. So just philosophically, it just doesn't make any sense. So that would be the main thing. So, Ozone, like Isotopes are really cool. Somebody from there emailed me like a few years ago and said, hey, is there anything from our collection you want? And I said, no. and then I think just like maybe 6 months ago, I saw the latest one and there's a tool in there. I don't know if you've seen this. You can specifically raise the level of the bass, the vocal,
Yes.
or the drums.
I have seen this, yep.
And I was like, oh, that looks cool. So I said, hey, does that offer still stand? Yep. They sent me a code for the full like top level ozone. So I've experimented with that. I've used it. I used it on that 20-year-old record because, I mean, it was basically, it was thrashed. I was just trying to, get what I could from it. And there were some really interesting tools there. So the main thing there is if you're going to master yourself, like, you don't have to use all the modules.
Yeah.
And think really hard if you need multiband. Like, the real world is not multiband. We don't split things up and bounce them off walls differently, or you know what I mean? Like, it's just, especially for people in the synthwave world, we're trying to, create an 80s sound with tools that didn't exist. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I use broadband, as I mentioned, with Unison compressor. It has multiband detection circuits, but all the compression is broadband, and I think that makes the most sense. So I would stay away. If I'm going multiband, it's because I'm solving a problem. The hi-hats, like, maybe they're fine, but when the shaker comes in addition to the hi-hats, now it's crazy loud. And so, and I can't get them to fix it in the mix. The big thing with me as a mastering engineer, the difference I think between me and most people is that we go back and forth and fix it in the mix. And that makes my job easy. Like, I'm not here to show off all the cool toys that I have to, to demonstrate the way that I can, work around all the problems you've created. I want to get it right. And then what happens is, over time, then the people who work with me come back with better and better mixes, and it's easier for everybody. So I would just say, if you're going to do it yourself, less is more. Compression is the main sound, the main difference between a mastered mix and an unmastered mix. So you're going to want some compression, and of course you're going to need limiting and dither at the end of the stage. And anything else, if you can fix it in the mix, I say fix it in the mix.
Yeah, great advice. Totally agree with that with regards to fixing it in the mix. And it sort of echoes a conversation I had a few weeks ago, whereby we went through the phases of recording, mixing, mastering, and how get it right at source when you're recording, so you're not having to fix it in the mix, and then get it right in the mix, so you're not then having to fix it in the master. And it just makes sense. Going back to what you said there about multiband compression. Actually, no, before I move on to that bit, I really like what you said about how we're creating music that existed in the 80s. We're using tools that didn't necessarily exist. And I'd never thought of it that way. And I really like that idea. And I think for the audience listening, if you think about it that way, when next time you're producing a song, just only use tools that you're probably not going to necessarily have those tools to hand, but maybe limit yourself to tools that you think would have been around in that particular time and see what you come up with. I think that's a great idea. So with regards to multiband compression, why do you think multiband? Because I've heard a few people say that now, audio engineers, mix engineers, mastering engineers, about multiband compression and how you can use it, but they kind of recommend not using it. Why do you think there is a sort of a pocket of people that like to push multiband compression?
Yeah, I don't know. I keep up. Lately I've tried to keep up with quote unquote modern production techniques, watching, because I honestly kind of stopped upgrading my tools, and this is another discussion for later, but hardware synths I hadn't kept up with at all for like 20 years basically. So lately I've kept up with hardware tools, DAW-less kind of setups and those and just synths, and with the latest plugins. And that's why I just feel so adamant against some of these, tools that are there to tame what they call, nasty resonances, which if you'll permit me just to explain that a little more, because I feel like that is so key. Like, people now, I see it everywhere. Like, I just saw a little a mix demonstration from the guy who mixed The Weeknd's After Hours, and it's on this site called Mix with the Masters, which it looks cool. So he goes through the chain, the mastering chain and the vocal chain. And I mean, it's amazing to me the record sounds as good as it does, because he goes through a clipper and but he's got Gullfoss on the master, and you just see that thing like it's got this huge spike pushing up at 12K like the whole way, bobbing up and down at 12K. And it's like, in Gullfoss, you can actually restrict the frequency range so it doesn't, that's obviously not what we want. But here's the thing. Okay, so acoustically, this idea of resonances being a problem just doesn't hold water. If I'm singing, if the song is in the key of G and the bass guitar is playing a G and I'm singing a G, you're going to see frequencies that correspond with G all over. That's what we want. That is a feature, not a bug. We don't need to tame that. So let's turn this around. What if I said to you, hey, I have a tool that will turn up every note that is out of key with your song. Would you like to use it? I hope that you would say no.
I would say no to that. I would say no. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, but that's what we're signing up for. So, and now I lost what the question was because I'm just so passionate about this.
Yeah, I think it started off with multi-band compression and why it's some producers, engineers, etc. are advocates of multi-band compression. But what you said there about resonance is fantastic. But yeah, it was multi-band compression.
Yeah, I can see. Yeah, I see it too in Ableton, like a lot. They split it up with that. There are built-in audio. I don't know. You use Logic, I think. I'm trying to remember.
I do. Yes, yeah.
I own Logic. I bought it because it's cheap, right? It was $199, and I bought it because I had clients that I was like, oh, use Logic? Great, send me your project. I'll mix it in Logic. And man, just trying to learn 2 sets of key commands, it does not work. But anyway, yeah, so the multiband thing, I mean, I used to kind of experiment with it in mastering, and it was interesting. It's arbitrary, of course, where you chop up the bands, and it can kind of make sense. Like if let's say you're recording a vocal and the vocalist is too close to the mic and you've got proximity effect and that's coming in more on the lower register, well then sure, there's a particular frequency range that really is the problem. Let's do that. Another option then would be a dynamic EQ, right? Where you can fine tune just that frequency range and not necessarily chop up the whole spectrum into bands. So, I mean, obviously there are times where you want to treat certain frequency ranges and not others dynamically. And that can make sense. I just don't like, I mean, the worst was back when the L3 came out, the Waves L3, right?
Yeah.
So you had the multiband limiter. And I was like, oh, wow, this is amazing. And you turn it up and it's like, oh, where did my bass go? It just, right? Because most of the energy is in the low end. So so I would say that not to never use multiband, but to think really hard about why you need it for this application. And there are applications, but I very rarely reach for it.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for your insight on that. I'm always intrigued because I get, like I said earlier, I get to speak to so many different people and you see all these different resources. And it's quite nice when I get... You hear different sides of the coin, so to speak. I think I mixed metaphors there. But it's interesting you mentioned dynamic EQ because that was going to be a question of mine, actually, what your thoughts are on dynamic EQ. Because I've heard some individuals sit on the fence, but some are pro, some are against dynamic EQ. I mean, what are your thoughts on dynamic EQ?
Again, I rarely use it. I'm thinking about, I have one bluegrass singer that I've worked with for many years, and she's got there's little kind of, nasal's not the right word. It's above nasal, but it's not a tone that creeps into her voice that I find, her most pleasing asset. And so I will sometimes hit that in Pro Q3 with a dynamic band. The difference is, so you can set, with Pro Q3, if you just turn it on, it's going to kind of always be compressing to some degree in that band. So instead, I like to take it off auto mode and set a threshold so that it's only doing the work when that particular, problem area jumps in. So again, it's really just a problem solver.
Yeah.
As for wind, and that's really, I so rarely use it. And I want to say I am a bit of a purist and a minimalist, and I think that there are probably cases where I could get over myself a little bit and use tools like that more judiciously, and they might benefit the final sound a little bit, but the byproducts of that approach would kind of haunt me. Like I would hear it and it would kind of bug me, you know what I mean? And and the same way, like I had mentioned that, these taming resonances doesn't make sense. It doesn't mean that if you slap Gullfoss on a mix that it's going to sound worse necessarily, right? So there's a difference between kind of having a philosophical problem and, agreeing that it has its uses or it can flatter a mix. I don't know. It's so funny. You see the guys, at least what I've seen in mastering is they'll put it on the beat. Oh, we just need this little tiny bit. And it's like so much you can barely hear it. It's like, okay, really? Did that really add anything?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I agree. And I think I'm very much in the similar camp to yourself with regards to the minimalist approach and not over complicating things. And from what you've said there, and I don't know, from what I've seen and experienced, is there a case to say that as when we're mixing, or rather than being creative, is it that we're just seeking problems and trying to fix something that might not necessarily exist because because you see all these, like you mentioned there with ozone and these various different modules that you can put in ozone, and then you're seeing them, you think, oh, I need to use that. I need to go and find a problem so I can use this module to show that I can use ozone because we have all these things. And then is there a case to say that we might be mixing by rote rather than actually creatively, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a danger for me. I think it can really be a danger if you're actually using presets. You know what I mean? Like presets on EQ and compression don't really make sense. I mean, maybe a preset, on a compressor for drums if the starting point for the attack and release, but even that's gonna, change things. But there is a mindset that we need to just get in there and maximize. Like wider is always better, right? I want more width. It's or even things that are helpful. For example, monoizing your low end. Yeah. Do we have to do it with every track? Like, I admit, like I use Basslane Pro. I don't know if you know Tone Project's Basslane Pro.
I know of Tone Projects, but not of that particular.
Oh man, their stuff is great. So they're the same company that make the Unison mastering compressor. They also have Kelvin, which is a dual stage saturator that's really cool. But anyway, like I like to check mixes with Basslane Pro, but I don't feel like everything, unless I know it's going to vinyl. Like not everything has to be in mono below 100 hertz. If it doesn't make it sound better. So yeah, I think we can maybe get a little dogmatic sometimes or want to use all the toys, or, I mean, I don't do this, but I could imagine going so far as to create a checklist, for each element or each bus of things we need to put on or check for or fine tune. And I think in the end, as long as you're using your ears and as long as you're not listening to the same track 1,000 times and then trusting your ears, because we know how that works, right? You've got to kind of get in and get out to some degree before you lose your objectivity. So I think if you can trust your ears, work quickly, and in a perfect world, set it aside and come back in a month and double check the mix, then you're probably not going to go too far off base.
No, brilliant. And it's great that you mentioned there about monoing instruments below 100 hertz or 80 hertz, because I had this exact conversation with someone earlier today. Actually, we were talking about the low end and how they wanted it to sound in a particular way. And I looked at the project and, can you show me what you're doing in this particular instrument? Can you show me what you're doing in that frequency spectrum? And I pretty much said exactly what you said there. Is you don't necessarily, there is no rule that says that everything has to be mono there. Maybe try it not in mono and see what happens. And once again, I effectively said what you said. If it sounds good, it is good. Right. You know. So it's brilliant, and it's great when I it's great for me when I give someone that information, that advice, and then I hear it from someone, a producer, mixer, mastering engineer, such as yourself as well. So it's great that my advice is sort of backed up there, which is brilliant. Brian, we're well aware of time here. So what I wanted to move on to next, because this information has been fantastic, is you've released a single, the Serious one. Maybe just a bit of information on that one there. Can you just explain to our audience a bit about that particular song, the style of the song, and what they can expect if they haven't heard it?
Yeah, so this was a tricky mix. It started in a weird way. I was kind of looking for some different drum sounds, and I pulled in a 606 from Ableton. And instead of just pulling in the drum samples, I think I pulled in a pattern. Like, I don't know if it was from some other source, but and it had all these crazy, like, 16th note cymbal hits that was just, it was totally overbearing, but it was kind of cool too. And so I worked from that and, eliminated half of the hits. But so that's kind of where that one started from. And I'm not ever going to use a 606 again, because the kick is this weird, blobby, pillowy, indistinct thunk.
Yeah.
That was really hard to get to work. So as far as the songwriting, like, well, okay, so I was and I still am pretty insecure about the vocals. Like, that's the lowest I've sung on a track. And I feel like I don't know. I'm tempted to re-sing it for the album. We'll see if I do that. And it's kind of a love song about unrequited love, but I would compare it to the Police's Every Breath You Take, where you hear it and you're like, oh, that's a beautiful song. And then it's like, oh, can't you see you belong to me? I'm like, like it's,
Yeah.
I'll be watching you. You're like, wait, maybe there's more to this than I realized. It's the same kind of thing. So the narrator is an unreliable narrator, which is always tricky, right? You're writing words that you expect the audience to know that what the person is saying isn't actually true. So it's about unrequited love. It's a little bit stalkerish, or maybe I think it could be potentially interpreted as the protagonist is maybe on the spectrum, or, just not understanding the situation socially in the way that we would hope it would be taken. So it's kind of a tricky song, but if you just want to take it as a very pleasant love song, it certainly works that way too.
Yeah, I love what you mentioned there about the Police and Every Breath You Take, because it is one of those ones where actually if you listen and sort of digest the lyrics a bit more, there are slightly sinister connotations surrounding that song. So it's interesting that, but brilliant. No, audience, do go check out the Serious one as well. It's a fantastic song, as they all are, and obviously I'll put links to your Bandcamp and whatnot, so the audience can go away and listen to those as well. Brian, we've got one question here, which is from our Facebook community. This is from a member called Tim Woodruff. Oh. And I think you might have possibly answered this earlier, but his question is, what is the biggest mastering mistake that you see people making, and what would you do to fix it?
Yeah, I guess I would go with, well, I said two already, right? Mixing through compression and limiting, and feeling like you need to use every module in Ozone. Just if you're not, look, my first 5 years as a mastering engineer, I'd like to think I was good because I probably did at the time, but it wasn't that good. It really takes a long time to be able to dial in the compression on an entire mix. And I kid you not, I am adjusting the 1,000th on the threshold, the right, because it'll usually be 3 digits after the decimal point. And that last digit, you wouldn't think it would matter. You'd think it's trivial. And I thought I was fooling myself for a long time, but it really makes a difference. Like there's just a sweet spot, and it is so small. And like I said, I thought I was fooling myself. There was a client, Craig, Space March in Australia. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he has great stuff. He used to work for Universal. He may still do that. And he had the ears to really detect it. So I would adjust things by that thousandth, and he would reliably say, nope, that was, so it was, because seriously, I thought, okay, because you've had that, right? Where you're mixing and you realize later that the EQ was in bypass, but you.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. We've all been there.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, so my point is that it is a very delicate process. If you're not confident in what you're doing, and if you haven't been mastering for a long time, you're probably not doing your best. At least try to minimize the potential damage. Don't compress more than 1 to 2 dB tops. Any problem you hear, if it can be fixed in the mix, fix it in the mix. I would say don't master louder than -9 LUFS. If that can be a really good test, actually. If I have a mix that I pull in and I master it at a volume that sounds about right, and then I pull it and I look and it's like, wow, it's like -7 LUFS. That probably means that there's work to be done in the mix. Like things aren't balanced right. If you've got a good mix, the exception I would say is a sustained like respace, something like that that's going to soak up a lot of energy. But for most mixes, if you can't get it sounding good at -9 LUFS, then you've got, go back into the mix. And for me, that means, bringing down the kick, bringing down the bass. I always want more, but I got to bring it down because that's where a lot of that energy gets eaten up.
Excellent advice. Yeah, brilliant. And it's great that you mentioned there about the -9 LUFS as well, because there's so much information online with regards to streaming platforms and advice in sort of air quotes regarding what levels it should be and whatnot. So it's great to hear that you as a mastering engineer, you're doing that. You're doing the mastering process and then looking at the level. There's sort of after as well. I've got one quick question with regards to this. So now you mentioned there, you sort of after the 5 years, you sort of progress and whatnot. Do you? It's a weird question, but do you hear like music differently when you're in mastering mode? If someone sends you a song, do you? It's a weird question, but do you hear it differently to analyzing a mix?
Yeah, I definitely do, because what happens quite often is I will master a record, and then the artist will say, "All right, so which is your favorite song, or what, or do you have, can you put it in a sequence for me?" And you'd be surprised at how many artists ask me to sequence their albums. But my first, it takes me aback, because I just have not listened that way at all. And if you ask me what the best song is, it's going to be the one with the best mix, right? At that stage. So yeah, I listen very, very differently. And I rarely comment on the music itself. When I'm mastering stuff, I just don't. Yeah, it almost doesn't even occur to me. So it's very different.
Interesting. Yeah, it echoes the conversation. Once again, I say this a lot because I've had so many conversations. But exactly that, and then how music is heard differently by mastering engineers. This has been brilliant. I know we've gone off on a tangent, as I regularly do on these episodes, because a guest will say something and then immediately I'll make a note and think, I want to ask this question. I end up going down a rabbit hole and then totally disregarding all the notes I've made prior to the interview. But no, this is fantastic information, and our audience is going to get loads out of this. This is great, and it's going to feed in nicely to like the Mix Engineer Mastering mini-series that I'm sort of collating and putting together. So this is perfect. Fantastic. Brian, where can our audience find you online? Where's the best place to go?
Well, colortheory.com would be probably the best entrance. So a lot of, I'm not very up on social media. I'm not doing videos. I mean, this isn't great. I mean, I realize I should probably do better. But I'm not on. I have my account on TikTok, but I'm not posting anything on TikTok. I don't do reels. The way to really keep up with me and get to know me would be to go to colortheory.com. I've got a mailing list subscription there. I send you 5 of my best songs for free, and that's the way I update people is through email. Of course, the next level then is becoming a patron, and that starts at $3. And you, as we discussed, get a new track every month, and many of those go on to be released at some point, but some don't. And you have input into kind of the process and what ends up getting released and picking artwork and fun stuff like that. So it's a good time.
Fantastic. That Patreon idea is brilliant. I love that idea that you're sending music out, and then I suppose your audience then they feel connected and part of the process because they're having an input, which is fantastic. Yeah,
it's great. It's great for me. Like cover art specifically. Like okay, pick a design, and that gets a lot of people really involved. And I don't know if you saw this. Spotify. I hope it comes soon, but announced something about connecting with Patreon so that we can have patron exclusive material on Spotify. Oh. So that would be amazing. Imagine, I've got a patron only album that, because they're listening on Spotify too, and they've got they can listen to my music through a podcast link, which is still cool. They can listen on their phone, but to listen on Spotify, and better yet, to have people who aren't patrons see that they can unlock this album by becoming a patron. It's it's really exciting. I hope it actually happens.
Yeah, definitely. It sort of sparks the creative fire in me, really, thinking about it now. I wonder if they'll do the same for podcasts. That's something I have to look into. Yeah, because I'm thinking exclusive. It's probably something I should discuss on air, but it's exclusive podcast episodes and whatnot. But that's further down the line. That's for another day. Have you got any key dates or anything like that you'd like to share with the audience? This episode will go live, I believe, if memory serves, sort of around the beginning of April.
Okay. Well, April will be the first month I take off from releasing a track in a long time, and that's because I mentioned the Ghost Again thing. That was the 5th release in 5 weeks. It was insane. And I need a break, and you need a break. And but what I'm going to try to do, and this is the first time I'm saying it out loud, so now it may have to happen, is I want to do another free plus shipping and handling offer. So I was thinking of giving away CD copies of The Majesty of Our Broken Past, which is kind of my big synthwave album from 2018. And so hopefully people can keep an eye out for that. It'll be on colortheory.com. So the idea is the CD's free. You just got to cover shipping, which isn't too bad in the U.S. But if you're not in the U.S., it is bad, and it's not my fault. But and then the next actual release will be She's Made of Wires in the beginning of May, of course, on Bandcamp Friday.
Brilliant. Excellent stuff. Brian, thank you so much for spending the time with me today. It's been great. I appreciate you've had to get up early and whatnot and squeeze this into your day. It's one of those ones where the podcast is around the world, but the times suit me and not necessarily the people I'm talking to a lot of the time.
Fair enough. No, I really enjoyed it. No, thank you for having me. Yeah.
No, it's been brilliant. It's been great to pick your brains and sort of hear more about your story at the beginning, and also your advice with regards to music production, mixing, and specifically mastering as well. Because I think this year on the podcast, the previous sort of 60 episodes haven't really touched on mastering at all. And it's been great that in 2023 there's been this episode, there was a previous one earlier in March, I think it was. So it's great to now have some mastering insight as well, because I know there are a lot of producers out there and artists who are doing it themselves and not necessarily know where to begin or have been misinformed. So it's fantastic to have you on chatting about that as well. So I know they're going to get a lot out of it. So brilliant. Once again, Brian, a big thank you for joining me today. Thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll speak to you soon.